Hi, I'm Erin Lundy.
And I'm Madeline Walden, and this is
Aquarium of the Pacific,
a podcast brought to you by Aquarium of the Pacific, Southern California's largest aquarium.
Join us as we learn alongside the experts in animal care, conservation, and more.
Welcome back to Aquarium of the Pacific. I'm Madeline Walden, the aquarium's digital content and community manager, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host,
Erin Lundy. I am the manager of conservation initiatives here at the Aquarium of the Pacific.
And today we're going to talk about sea lions with Erin Bell, who is a
Finally.
mammalogist.
I do feel like that was one of our most requested animals.
Truly.
And I mean, sea lions, we had to save them. We had
to save them for, not last, but just for a second season.
Yeah,
to keep you around.
to keep people coming back.
What I love about this episode and last week's episode, we're on a theme. So we had Alex and Alex last week.
Oh.
This week we have Erin and Erin.
It's pretty cool.
It's a.
But I'm always here. Are we
You're
ever going
always
to
here.
hire someone else named Madeline?
No.
Or are they going to go by
Never.
Madeline, and then it'll be two
That's
very
fine.
different. A Madeline is
Madeline
okay.
and a
Madeline
Madeline.
is not.
Mhm.
All right, that's fair. But Erin Bell has been one of our mammalogists here at the aquarium for quite some time. She's been working with our sea lions for a few years now, and she has a pretty great relationship with each of our boys. So it's fun to hear her stories and hear her talk about them.
Yeah, I don't have a favorite animal, but if I did, it might be our sea lions.
And which one is it?
Harpo was
He's
my
a good
all-time
boy.
favorite. Really good boy. We'll talk a little bit about Harpo in this episode. But all of them, really, I think. They're just big
So
water
Kane
puppies.
is the right answer.
Keep your answer to yourself. I didn't ask. No, but I'm really excited about this episode. We learned so much with Erin. And something exciting happening this summer is that our seal and sea lion encounters are coming back.
Yes, if you book a Pinniped encounter on our website, you will meet either a seal or a sea lion. It's a surprise.
It's a surprise.
And all of our animals have actually been working very hard on encounters and being ready for meeting people again this summer. And I love doing encounters, which I know it's not everyone's favorite thing to do in the world, but sometimes you just get a guest that just loves what's going on and is so into it and learns so much and takes away so much. And really the public and all the people that come to the aquarium are what makes the place run and make it great. So thank you for coming. Please sign up for Pinniped Encounters. You'll meet Erin or any of the other people.
One of the many Erins that
Yeah.
No, I think it must be a cool reminder of how cool your job is, because it is your job. You're here, a significant amount of time, and it's just your day to day is feeding these sea lions, and then you have someone who is so excited to come into the habitat to get close to these animals, and it's a good reminder, like, oh yeah, this is really amazing.
It kind of refreshes your passion when you're like, oh, I do have a cool job. Because day to day, you're like, yeah, I smell real bad. I stink like fish at all times, and I'm tired. And, like, there's a lot of physical
It's your
labor.
job.
Yeah. And we never smell good. And I feel bad every time I'm, like, introducing myself to the encounter guests. And I'm like, hey, I'm sorry.
You're like
And
shaking their hand. You're like, I'm covered in fish.
my hand is wet for some reason, and it's not that I just washed it. Like, I don't really know what's going on.
No.
But yeah, I think I won't shake your hand if you don't want me to, and I'm gross.
Some people
If you
are
do-
really all about touching the fish, and
Yeah.
some people just aren't, because you usually offer that during.
Yeah,
and
and we have gloves that people can wear as well. So there's a lot of
you
different.
can always wash your hands after too.
No, you actually can't.
The rest of the day.
actually can't wash
Stuck
your hand
with
ever
them.
again. No,
Day
it's
in the
been
life
cool.
of a mammalogist.
I've been really thrilled with the idea of our encounters coming back, and I think it'll be cool. And, whether or not you get to meet a sea lion or if you meet a seal, the animals are super engaging and fun, and really you get to learn about all of the species that we have here, and you have a captive audience of a mammalogist who can answer all of your fun marine mammal questions as well.
That's great. And we'll talk about seals specifically on an upcoming podcast, but today we're going to focus mostly on sea lions.
What kind of seals?
Harbor seals. The ones we have here.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense.
Kaya. We can focus on one seal.
Just Troy.
Just Troy.
There's not a lot.
No.
Just-
He makes a donut.
he does make a
He
donut.
can make himself into a donut.
I
That's
would
a lot
love to
me.
have Troy on the podcast.
I think we need more animals
He
on
might
the podcast
speak more
this
than
year.
Lola did.
Michael the fish.
We could have Michael the Fish on the podcast.
Bloop, bloop.
I think that's a good idea. But
Me
anyway,
too. Anyway,
if you would like to visit the aquarium and sign up for a Pinniped Encounter, you will be able
please
to.
do.
Very soon, actually. It starts mid-June, which I think is
Now.
probably right now.
Yeah, and come
for
see
you.
our new frog exhibit. We talked a little bit about that a couple weeks ago, but
There's a lot of stuff going on.
there's a lot of stuff happening this summer. Come visit the aquarium.
That's a reasonable
Boom.
suggestion.
Cool. Let's get into today's episode.
Today we're joined by Erin Bell, who is one of our mammalogists here at the aquarium, to talk about sea lions. Erin, how have our sea lions been today?
They've been pretty good. They've been pretty good all
Today.
day.
Well, it does
They're
vary.
pretty good most of the time, in general. But we've worked on some more difficult stuff, and they've all been very cooperative and very hungry.
It's been cool to see a lot of the behavioral progression that our animals have made in the last few years since you've worked here. And I know that you've been working on some really cool behaviors with our sea lions, so maybe we can touch on that later on. But you are a marine mammal trainer. That is most kids' dream job. But how did you get into being a marine mammal trainer?
So I studied environmental science and zoology when I was in university, and that led me to continuing my passion for the ocean that I've had since I was a little kid, coming to the aquarium in the Pacific, where I learned all the things that made me want to be a part of this field. And then from there, I got really lucky and got an internship at the Marine Mammal Care Center here in Southern California, learning about seal and sea lion rehabilitation and how amazing they are as animals. And then was able to move on into the training sphere. And now here at the aquarium, I get to do a little bit of both. I get to work with our animals that are permanent residents here at our aquarium, and also contribute to different conservation rehabilitation efforts through the aquarium.
That's awesome. It's cool to see that although we have a population of pinnipeds that sort of lives here more permanently, and we can touch on who those guys are later,
The boys.
we do a lot to sort of help out with other rehabilitation efforts and conservation efforts with marine mammals around California. And it's also cool to know that you grew up coming to this aquarium and now you work here.
It's the best. That's so
Yeah.
cool. What's your favorite part of your job?
I think it's relationship building with the animals. I started at the aquarium just a little over a year ago now, and in that time, seeing the animals' response to me specifically change, go from, I'm walking in the tunnel and they look at me and they're like, whatever, that's a person in navy blue and khaki, to them specifically working to interact with me. They know who I am. I can work on some more challenging behaviors with the animals because I've built that trust with them. I think that's my favorite part, of seeing those relationships grow. And then watching them when the guests come and they have those really important experiences that I had when I was little, of kind of realizing how magical the ocean can be and just how incredible these animals are when you get to see them up close.
Who do you think you have the best relationship with and the worst relationship with, and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I have Well, it depends on what we're doing. I think I have both. Sometimes the best relationship with one of our California sea lions, Kane. I've worked with him a lot. He was one of the ones I worked with pretty early on in me working here, and I am assigned some of his really important husbandry behaviors, teaching him how to go into some of our different areas of the exhibit that he might be a little bit more tentative going to, which means that I get the fun task of just having him go in one spot and feeding him just all the fish I have in my bucket, which is a sea lion's favorite thing in the world. But that also means that sometimes he sees me and he's like, are we going to do that somewhat scarier thing? But we have pretty resilient boys. They're really great. They're really smart. So I think Kane, I have a pretty good relationship with. And then I think it's actually pretty even, honestly, among all of them. I think it's more about what we're doing more so than me specifically.
So Kane best, and then everyone else.
Everyone else pretty good, but Kane's pretty cute.
He's the best boy.
He's a pretty good boy.
I know that's your favorite.
Yeah, it's a spoiler. Kane is the favorite of all the Aarons.
Anyone named Aaron, Kane is their favorite. I don't know what it is, but something about the name. Well, we wanted to learn a little bit more about California sea lions specifically. Although in our pinniped habitat, we do have both California sea lions and harbor seals. The main question we get is sort of what are the differences between seals and sea lions? So could you briefly elaborate on sort of how you can tell the difference?
Sure. So they are both part of the same group. They're both pinnipeds, which means I've heard some people say fin-footed or feather-footed. If you look at that shape of those really nice flippers they have on them, that's where that comes from. So they are two different groups within pinnipeds. We have our eared seals, which are our sea lions, our California sea lions, our Steller sea lions, southern sea lions. Fur seals, weirdly enough, also
Tricky.
with all those sea lions. And then we have our true seals, which are our harbor seals or our leopard seals. And there are a few pretty distinct differences between them. I think the easiest visually is you notice that one of them is called eared seals, and that is because they have external ear structures. If you come to the aquarium and take a look at our sea lion collection, you'll see those little ears on the outside that kind of look like weird little Tootsie Rolls. They're very cute.
They're so cute. Little ears.
Yeah, but if you look at our seals, they just have ear holes. They don't have that external ear structure, so that's one of the main differences. But there are quite a few. The other easy one, if you're ever far away, is if they're on land, how are they moving? A sea lion can rotate their hips underneath themselves, and they can effectively run or walk when they're on land, whereas our seals, Their hips are fused straight out. They cannot move them, and they end up doing that kind of very cute wiggly worm movement where they just kind of flop around like a little caterpillar. It's very cute, and the scientific name for it is actually called galumphing, which I think is very charming.
Yeah, and it's from the poem The Jabberwocky, and with his head he went galumphing back. They were just like, yep, that sounds like how a seal moves.
And if you watch it, that is what it looks like. It looks like galumphing.
I laughed because I imagined a seal running, and the way that they move when they do it fast is so fun.
It is. It's really good. And like depending on the size of the seal, their front flippers may or may not be able to touch the ground.
Kaya.
Yeah.
So cute.
My favorite thing is some of our seals, like Troy, if he wants to move a little bit quicker or is just a little tired or whatever, his go-to is just to roll. So sometimes you'll ask him back into the water and he's like, this is probably easier. And he just rolls his way.
He's just a big circle.
Oh, they're so cute. Okay, enough about seals. We'll do a
Sorry.
seal episode.
Got distracted.
This is a sea lion episode, you guys. Be serious. We have 3 sea lions here at the aquarium. We'll get into that in a second, but they all look distinctly different. Can you talk about the differences between male sea lions, mature male sea lions, and females?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even their babies.
Yeah. So all 3 of our California sea lions here at the aquarium are all male. But if you come and look at them, they don't all look like a classic bull male sea lion. We only really have Parker, who is that very typical male sea lion, and that's because the other 2 are neutered. And so the size of a male sea lion, along with that really cool bump that they have on their head that's called a sagittal crest, all comes as they come into maturity, as they come into sexual maturity. For a few different reasons. One is that large size helps them be very competitive when it's breeding season or sea lion rut, which is happening around the summertime. Mm-hmm. That big bump actually allows for additional muscle attachments on their head. So Parker can actually, not only is bigger than our other boys, but can bite harder. It's very impressive.
His bark matches his bite.
It does. And so the main differences between a male and a female are really that size and the fact that the males do develop that crest on top of their heads. So if you look at our other 2 sea lions, Kane and Chase, who are neutered, they effectively look like large female sea lions. They are still bigger than a female California sea lion would get, but the body shape-wise is pretty much what they look like.
Have we ever had female sea lions at the aquarium?
We have in the past, the long, distant past, and we haven't in quite some time. Sometimes having female sea lions with an intact male sea lion can encourage breeding behaviors and some competition between animals that might not necessarily be so good for them socially. I'm sure there are groups out there that are managed appropriately with mixed-sex sea lions, and I don't think, had the capacity for that. But I think it's anything's game in the future. We don't really know, but we've opted to have 3 boys and neuter 2 of them so that limits sort of that competition too, because 2 testosterone-filled dudes in the same habitat is just a recipe for them getting into a kerfuffle.
Yeah. Out in the wild, males and females will be around each other, but they do tend to hang out in social groupings that are more generally male or generally female other than breeding season. So this is a pretty natural grouping of animals.
Very cool.
Yeah. Parker is huge right now. Right now it is the end of May. Oh no, it's June. My goodness. It is June. And how big is Parker approximately right now?
He is about 800 pounds. So that is a gain over the last few months from around 600 all the way up to about 800 pounds. I believe the biggest he has gotten while living with us was about 850. Last year was about 815. And that's because, like I said, we're going into sea lion rut. This is sea lion breeding season. And his main job as an intact male is to be huge and defend his territory. Out in the wild, he would be going up on a beach and he would be protecting a harem of females to make sure that he was the only one that got to breed with them and pass on his genetics as the big competitive male. So they put on all this weight so that while they're defending their territory, they don't have to eat. They will spend weeks just barking and yelling and fighting. And they have all those incredible stores of blubber to help get them through that time. What
does Parker do, given that he has no access to females for the duration of the summer?
Sure. So he still gets a little defensive of his territory. He will still do like the posturing. He'll still bark, and he will definitely communicate to the other boys if he feels like they are infringing on his rights as the big bull male in that exhibit. But we work really hard to work with him on that. So we give him his space. We let him spend his time as he prefers. sometimes he still wants to come and work with us. He still wants to come to session. He still wants to do all those mentally enriching training programs. And sometimes he just wants to swim in a circle
And bark.
and
Whole
bark.
time.
So we really are
a
able
lot
to
of
work
feelings
with him.
going on right
yeah,
now.
which is nice. But he is a very, very good boy, and he makes managing this hormonal time for a sea lion pretty easy compared to what it could be with some other animals.
He is such a good boy.
He is really good.
I think people typically think of like a dominant male as being like aggressive or in your face, and Parker is like, "Hey, just don't come over here right now." And it's very mellow.
Just right now,
Yeah.
I just got a lot.
I got
lot on my
feelings.
mind.
He does a good job.
gotta
He's
be
drawn
defensive.
boundaries with the other animals, and they
Yeah.
respect them.
but then at
and
the
it
end of
works
the
out really
day,
nicely.
they're cuddling.
Oh yeah,
on
they
the
all
beach.
still nap together.
The boundaries are for when we're awake.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
We still want to snuggle.
It's just snuggle time. What do they eat? What do they eat in the wild versus what they eat here at the aquarium?
In the wild, they'll eat small schooling fish. So here at the aquarium, we feed them herring, capelin, and squid primarily. They'll also get some other types for enrichment just to keep things fresh and interesting. The other day, they got some night smelt and some silver sides, which are quite small. Like the average capelin is probably like 4 to 5 inches, maybe 3 to 4 inches, whereas a silver side is like maybe 2 inches. So it was a very fun session of just
Snack.
seeing how they responded to their snacks being a little bit smaller.
I think it's funny that a lot of times the typical thinking is like, oh, a new animal or an animal is going to love a new food type with like a huge fish, like a salmon or something that's massive. And some of our animals prefer the really tiny fish.
They do.
Especially a really, really big salmon.
Yeah.
Prefers the smallest fish you can find.
Parker, he is not more reinforced by a large herring than he is by one small capelin. It's
like,
his favorite thing.
So good.
Yeah.
Concentrated
The
snack.
finer things
Yeah.
in life.
Yeah,
It's
he
a-
likes
it's a
this-
little-
He knows what he likes.
Yeah. Oh, precious. What about their life cycle and their lifespan? How long do they live for? What is the average life cycle of a California sea lion?
Under human care, California sea lions tend to live into their mid-20s is pretty average for them under human care. Obviously, their lifestyle differs quite a bit when they are under human care than it does out in the wild. Out in the wild, they do tend to live less time, usually mid to high teens is pretty normal for them. Out in the wild, Parker would no longer be a large competitive male like he is in our collection. He would have been outcompeted by the younger, more energetic sea lions out in the wild at this point. So under human care, they can live for a pretty long time. But out in the wild, they do have some other things that they have to
Yeah,
contend
there's a lot
with.
going on out there.
How old is Parker?
Parker is currently 21 years old. Might be 22 by the time this podcast comes out. End of June is his birthday.
Yeah, that's crazy. I think I've known Parker for 10 years, and so he was a teenager when I knew him. He
Yeah.
was a competitive male back then. And he's still very much, I mean, he's massive.
He's still our most competitive male that we have.
But as they age and what sort of geriatric effects do we see on our
Yeah.
animals?
So a lot of my job as a mammologist is not just training them to do anything, but it's training them to do things that improve their welfare. So specifically for a geriatric animal, that's making sure that we can do quality vet exams on them, especially with an animal as large as Parker. If Parker does not feel like participating in
He's not
something,
gonna-
that's all up to him. I cannot ask an 800-pound animal to do something it doesn't want to do. So with Parker, as he becomes more geriatric, the things we're looking at specifically are how are his joints doing? 800 pounds is a lot of weight on an animal's shoulders or on their hips. How is he still eating normally? Is pretty much are we able to do all the diagnostics that we might want to? So Parker, again, we've said how many times he's a very good boy, but he really is the best. So currently I'm working on his x-ray behaviors. We can do voluntary x-rays on him, which is fun because he's actually so big that it's really hard to get a clear image on an x-ray because he is.
That's just all of his blubber.
That's just all his blubber. We had detected arthritis in him a few years ago, and he's been on Cosequin, which helps with his arthritis. So we've been adjusting some of the ways we train him. We've been retraining his ultrasound behavior, which he's had for a long time and is really good at, but now we're able to try and do it in the water where he's putting less pressure on his body. So a lot of our job as mammalogists is to watch those changes and make sure that we are ahead of them, and we are able to work with him as he needs to be worked with as he gets a little bit older.
That's so great. I also know a little bit about sea lion teeth thanks to Erin Lundy, who's made a ton of very popular TikToks with me. And I know that their teeth can sometimes in the wild can sometimes lead to a lot of issues for them. And so here at the aquarium, we're able to extend their lifespan. That might be part of it, right? Is by the dental care that they receive.
It's definitely different. It's with pinnipeds is interesting because their teeth aren't there like ours are there for chewing. They don't actually chew their food. No matter how big that herring is, if you throw it to, well, maybe not Parker, it's not a favorite, but
let it hit him in the face.
if you throw it to Kane or Chase, they'll swallow it down completely whole. If a sea lion needs a fish smaller, usually they'll just kind of thrash their heads around till it breaks into pieces. But their teeth are really critical for catching that fish. It's critical for them to be able to get the food that they need to eat. And it's also really important for them to be able to defend themselves. Their teeth is what they have to do that. So out in the wild, as they get older, just like with anyone, the quality of those teeth are going to deteriorate. But here we do husbandry checks on them every morning. So I can actually ask them to open up their mouth. I can look at their gum health. I can look at their teeth. But sea lions are really interesting in that, unlike seals or humans, they don't have enamel on their teeth that protects their teeth. Instead, they have this really beautiful black bacteria. So their teeth look, they look really dirty and dark sometimes, but that is what healthy sea lion teeth look like. It has that nice covering of bacteria to keep them safe.
Bacteria.
It's great.
We also had a sea lion here for a very long time, and for people who are maybe less familiar with the aquarium or have known of Harpo, Harpo unfortunately passed away last year. It was a little bit unexpected for us, but I bring up Harpo because as a yearling sea lion, I think he was only 1 year old, he developed a tooth and bone infection, and they were able to remove his teeth and they were able to rectify that infection. But for the duration of the period that he had that infection, he wouldn't eat because it's so painful. I mean, I know I have a toothache and I can't even drink water, you know, and it's so painful that it sort of overrides their desire to eat. They're so like averse to it. And so I remember a couple of our volunteers who are wonderful, and I've worked with Harpo since he was young, described that they had to like sliver the capelin into like paper thin sheets and just kind of like slip it down his throat. And he would allow it because he was hungry. He just didn't want to use his teeth at all. And he recovered. And the funniest thing about Harpo is as he grew, his jaw didn't quite grow right. And so his tongue just kind of always stuck out of his mouth. He was just the absolute best boy. But that dental care goes so far, and that issue, if that was a wild animal, would have never been rectified, and he probably would have starved because that is so painful that is just not something they can overcome.
I think it just speaks so much to the love you guys have for the animals and the quality of care here at the aquarium that the staff then are just slivering
like, as thin as possible.
These just making these very gourmet sushi. Like that's an expensive cut of fish already.
Let alone cut properly for like hours and hours.
Gorgeous.
And sea lions do not eat a small amount of food. They eat a lot of food, especially growing boys. They eat a lot of food. So I'm sure that was time intensive, but
I'm glad you
was worth
brought up
it for
Harpo.
sure.
He's such a good boy.
it was worth it.
Yeah, he's worth it. Well, let's get into sea lion conservation. Speaking of kind of things that affect them in the wild, last summer we had an event that happened here off of our coast here in Long Beach, and all up and down
That
California
makes it sound
coast, right?
positive. An event.
An event happened. It was not positive.
It was a bad event.
Yeah, it was a bad one.
I think they describe it as a UME, which is an unusual mortality event for California sea lions and also other types of pinnipeds. But can you speak a little bit as to what happened and how frequently that happens?
So this is not an unprecedented event. It is when we end up with higher levels of domoic acid out in our wild environment along our coasts here. My understanding of domoic acid is it comes from algae blooms. So depending on how much upwelling we've had from the nutrient-rich seafloor and how warm the water is, that affects how much the algae blooms. And then the fish eat that algae, and then marine mammals eat that fish, and it can build up in their systems. Domoic acid, unfortunately, can cause seizures. It can cause
It's like neurological
just
issues.
different neurological problems that, depending on the amount, never actually go away. And so these are animals that have been doing a really good job eating, and they have built up enough of that toxin in their bodies that then they have those neurological issues and are no longer able to care for themselves, and they end up putting themselves up on the beach. It's really interesting working with a marine mammal that has domoic acid poisoning, because you can tell. Like you look at them in the eye and you're like, no one's home. Like this is not a normal animal.
Something's off.
And it's very sad, but we are very lucky that we have a lot of incredible marine mammal rescues in our area. Specifically closest to the Aquarium Pacific is the Marine Mammal Care Center in San Pedro. And I'm really proud to work for a facility that is actually works to send people like me, like on our team, that have experience with marine mammals or specific rehabilitation experience to go help out at those facilities during these events where they have well over 100 animals more than they might normally have at that time of year, who all need individual care and need to be given the best chance to survive. And luckily there are animals that recover well enough to go back out into the wild, and there are also some that when they don't fully recover are able to go be ambassadors of their species, like our boys here at other facilities around the country.
It's cool to see sort of that whole process from start to finish. As devastating as it is, it's amazing to see people from different organizations and institutions come together and really become aware of this. And we had people who weren't directly working at the rehab center going out and walking the beaches and helping to report strandings that they were seeing so that the appropriate parties could come out and collect those animals and deliver them to the Marine Mammal Center for help. So it was a multifaceted response, and yet last year was big. Yeah,
it was a big team effort. And just for anyone listening, if you ever are out on one of our beaches and you see an animal that you think might be in distress, the best thing you can do is to start by keeping your distance. You don't want an animal that might be sick for you to approach it and then they get scared and then they put themselves back in the water where they'd already worked so hard to get themselves out. And just call one of the local rescues. Honestly, if you Google the number, it's gonna come up.
We'll put it in the show notes too. You can add it in your phone. Just Marine Mammal Rescue,
and they will know how to work with that animal. They'll be able to come out, inspect that animal, see if it's one that meets the criteria for coming into one of those rescues for a little bit.
I laugh because I've a handful of times just seen an elephant seal hauled out on the beach when I've been looking for them. And if you didn't know that was normal for them, they look pretty. They look pretty down.
That's very true. Especially if you see a molting elephant seal, they look
terrible.
A little rough,
and they smell terrible. You're like, something's definitely wrong here. That's just them. They're just super.
They are semi-aquatic animals. They are supposed to spend some time on land.
But interesting way to start your career here at the aquarium is to experience an event like that and going back and forth. That must have been a really interesting start to your summer.
It was, but it was also really nice going back because that's actually where I started. So it was people I knew. It was a facility I knew. I knew how it all worked. It was really nice. It was really good.
I want to hear again, you're talking about molting animals. Do our sea lions molt? Do sea lions molt at all?
They do, yeah. Not in the same way an elephant seal molts. An elephant seal has what we call a catastrophic molt, where it molts all of it all at the same time. The skin, the fur, They look rough during that time.
They smell rough. That's just awful.
But
I like elephant seals for the record. They're gross a little bit.
They're a little stinky.
For like a month. They're like,
but if no one's ever seen an elephant seal pup, you should look it up because they are very cute.
Really cute.
They're huge, but they're very
cute.
Can
you imitate the sound that they make?
I can't. But it does sound like a monkey. It's a very weird
sound.
sound. It's really nothing like getting into the rescue at 5 a.m., opening your car door and just hearing the yelling and like the smell hits you all at the same time. It's actually very nostalgic for me, which is weird.
I think it's great work that we're doing, but man, there is a specific marine mammal stink, especially around molting season.
It's true, yeah. So our boys do get a little stinky during molting season, but theirs is not nearly as dramatic. They just, pretty much for us, we just start finding small piles of fur along our desk our decks. Sorry,
your desk too.
They deliver it to us.
Hey, molting.
And mostly just where the sea lions all sleep together. You just kind of find these piles of fur and oil.
The oil is something I didn't expect.
Yeah, the oil is impressive.
That's probably what the smell comes from mostly.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And it stains everything.
Honestly, though, even not during molting season, a dry marine mammal
stinky.
is a little stinky.
People who have ever
so
gone.
blonde.
They're
so
blonde.
They are very cute.
Kane is the blondest, I think. If you've ever been to San Francisco and you've seen all the sea lions lying out on the pier, just get a good whiff of that, and that's what they smell like. It's intense. Like, it is a musky, kind of like oceany, but stinky odor. Like,
which is interesting because our sea otters, who are actual mustelids, who are a musky group of animals, not stinky.
What role do sea lions play in the wild? What is their if sea lions aren't doing well, kind of what does that cause and effect?
Well, we're really lucky in that, in general, sea lions have been doing very well for a long time, especially our California sea lions.
There's a ton of them.
Yeah. But they are one of the top predators, and so they help control fish populations and make sure that those stay healthy. Anytime any population ends up too big, then their food source ends up being overused. And it's just kind of this cyclical problem of an ecosystem is really good at balancing itself. So anytime you remove any part of that, you're going to start seeing problems. So for sea lions, it would be specifically those schooling fish. But luckily, they are a pretty healthy wild population. And I think a big part of that is they're very easy to love, and people tend to protect what they love.
Yeah.
And so sea lions have had a lot of support for a long time, especially when it comes to places like the Marine Mammal Rescues. So we're really happy to be able to showcase them and have people who love them come see them, but also then potentially learn about some of the other animals we have at the aquarium that might need a little bit more help out in the wild.
I love that. You protect what you love. So we try and get people here to love everything.
Yes.
But you start with the easy.
You start with
Yeah.
the cute, with the cute and charismatic animals like the sea otters and the sea lions,
And then you just
we
like
get
throw
ya.
a sea cucumbber at them, and you're
Oh.
like, these are fun
Hey,
too.
care about
What do you
this.
think my whole job? Otters and frogs. I'm like, hey, sea otters, also frogs.
Oh, frogs. Look
But-
at these two.
By the time this podcast episode comes out too, I do think that we will have our pinniped encounters back up and running. So if you ever want to meet or smell or touch or whatever a pinniped, that's an opportunity you might get if you do a pinniped encounter.
Yeah.
And so sign up through our website if you'd like to meet Aaron or any of the people who work with our marine mammals.
They can also help you propose.
That's true.
true.
Propose prom, propose marriage,
Yeah,
propose
we had a promposal.
whatever you want to
Dude, yeah.
propose.
Couple promposals.
Those are my favorite days. I love when I walk up and like there's a proposal and I'm so worried I'm gonna blow it. Like I'm just gonna walk up to the couple and be like, so today's
Well, and everyone's
Congrats!
just staring at them so oddly, and they're like, "Are all encounters this conspicuous?" But anyway, it's
are
cool, and they're great ambassador animals for other species and people. There's nothing like it, just meeting a sea lion. You're like,
Yeah.
that's a thing I can do.
I
It's-
forget when I bring people up for
Yeah.
encounters, it's that realization like, oh, from the other side, they don't seem as massive or as big.
Yeah, it's
but
especially
up close.
when people meet Parker and they watch him
whoa.
walk up the steps to the area where we normally do encounters, they're like, that's a little
big
That's a little
guy."
scarier than I
He's coming towards me.
Yeah.
Is he gonna stop?
but he's such a
He's
sweetheart.
such a sweet boy, and we're really lucky to be able to do these encounters because the ones out in the wild might not be such sweet boys.
Yeah.
Parker has been taught since he was very little what safe interaction with people looks like, because I certainly would not want an 800-pound animal who didn't know that I was fragile that close to me.
No, you definitely don't want to do sea lion encounters in the wild. Just stick to
Please
the
don't encounter
aquarium of the
them.
Pacific.
I think it's also illegal to approach marine mammals in the
Definitely.
wild.
Yes.
Cool. Well, let's get into our boys. Parker, Kane, and Chase. Are they rescue animals? Are they eligible for re-release? Tell us a little bit about how we acquired them.
So all of our current population was all born under human care. For our pinniped population in general, one of them, Kaya, or one of our harbor seals, was born right here on our exhibit.
I saw it. It's crazy.
That was a cool day.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I wish I was there. And then the other ones were born at other facilities and then came to us. One of the really nice things about being part of AZA is we're able to work with other zoos and aquariums to make sure that all the animals born under human care have a good place for them to live where they can thrive. Because any animal that is actually born under human care is a non-releasable animal. They are not eligible to go back out into that wild environment, and for a pretty good reason. They don't have the skills that they would need to survive out there. Parker, since he was really little, has learned that the best way to get fish is to be polite and to hang out with people and kind of help create those relationships, whereas a sea lion out in the wild learns pretty early on that the best way to get fish is to fight with other sea lions.
Very impolite.
Yeah, it's not nearly as chill. So these sea lions are all non-releasable animals. They will be with us or at another facility for the rest of their lives, being ambassadors for their counterparts out in the wild. And we are very happy to have them.
Yeah, we
have
are.
some really good boys.
So Parker, Kane, and Chase. We talked a lot about Parker already, but tell us a little more about Kane and Chase.
Sure. They are very funny. So we talked about Parker's age. He is about to be 22. Kane and Chase are about half that age. Chase, earlier in June, turned 10 officially. It's a 10-year-old boy. And then Kane's birthday is a little bit later, and he's going to be 11. So they're both effectively middle-aged boys, but I think of them as so young
Yeah, I
just
know.
compared to Parker. But they're very similar in a lot of ways, but also pretty distinctly different animals. I think the reason Kane is the favorite of all of the Aarons is because he's a very smart animal. He really he shows us that puzzles and thinking through problems is something that he finds reinforcing, that he finds enriching. And I find that very fun. That's also very reinforcing and enriching for me when working with him. He's just always trying to figure out what you're going to ask next. And a lot of the times he's right. Sometimes he's super wrong, but that's also fun.
He commits to it, though.
He does.
That's
He
what's
does.
great.
He's very certain he's right sometimes. But then once you show him that, like, maybe that wasn't what we were going
like,
for,
"Oh,
he's like, okay, never mind. I'll try again. And then Chase similarly also sometimes tries to figure out what we want him
Chase
to do.
commits to everything.
He commits real hard. Even once you've told him, like, maybe that wasn't what we were going for, he's like, nah, I'm pretty sure.
He's like, what if you wanted to try this, though?
Yeah. I think
'Cause I could do it.
Yeah, sometimes I describe Chase as like first thought, best thought.
That's a good description
Yeah.
for Chase.
And he's just like, I'll keep doing it. Eventually, that's what you'll want.
This
but
is
he's-
what I want to do.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. But I think a lot of that also comes from he's also a very smart animal. He wants things to be the way he's decided they are.
Yep.
But we're able to work with him. We make sure that we are very clear with what we are asking. And he is really fun. I know he's actually a lot of people's favorites.
Megan.
Yeah. Just his personality is, he's a very good communicator, I think,
He
is what
does.
I will describe Chase
He's
as.
the
And-
favorite because he's the most interactive in the tunnel, right?
He has 4 vocals. That's how much he can
Ooh.
communicate.
That's true.
And we can insert a clip of him
Yeah.
making all the weird sounds. But it turns out sea lions can make a wider array of noises than I've ever imagined, and most of that I learned from Chase making a very wide array
Specifically,
of...
Chase
Yeah.
can make
Yeah.
a wide
Maybe
we
no one
did,
else
we
can.
did finally get the sound that sounds just like a typical sea lion, which is nice.
We did finally land on that.
Yeah.
3 first vocals he learned sound nothing like they
No.
typically. Maybe his big boy bark is kind of like an aggressive, like sea lion
Yeah.
fighting bark, but they're all just on cue behaviors, and so he can sing an opera.
It's very
He
impressive.
can
It's
gargle, and then he can bark
can-
big and bark small.
Big bark, small bark.
Yeah.
He's
and
cute.
Kane can do 2 of those.
He can
He's a silent
breathe
boy.
heavily.
Yeah.
From my perspective, just knowing kind of the dynamics of it, it seems like Kane has been a slightly more challenging animal to train. Do you think that's due to his intelligence, or is that kind of the reason that he is a favorite too, because he is such a challenge sometimes?
I think he used to be,
Used to be.
much
Yeah.
more of a challenge to work with, but I think it was because he was nervous. And I mean, honestly, same. But, animals that, especially intelligent animals that can perceive the environment around them and understand what's going on, there's so much stimulus. And he was new to us. He came to us when he was about 4 years old.
Yeah.
And so, he went from one home that he understood and friends that he knew to a totally new place. And it took him a while to adjust, as it can, When I started here, Kane was brand new, and he would come to sessions by staying underwater with just his eyes under the surface of the water. He's like, I'm really trying to be here, but I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And, it was just every day just loving on him and making sure he knew that, hey, what we're doing is totally safe. And it took some time to come out of his shell. Now I would argue that Chase is more difficult to work with. But mostly because Kane has gained so much confidence in the last few years that he is just ready to go. He's doing encounters. He's meeting people. He's
sticking his
not-
tongue out.
Yeah, he's not nervous about a seagull flying 3 miles away. Like he's
I wore a rain jacket with him the other day, and he was like, I can come up on deck next to that. That's probably safe.
Chase, on the other hand, rain jacket. Oh my
No,
goodness.
someone wore an X-ray vest, the lead vest, into the exhibit like 20 feet away from him, and he did this like tiny little bark like sunk underwater.
He's like, no, they're coming for me for some reason. That outfit so specifically.
Yeah, he has since allowed that to exist within his environment
Thank
a
goodness.
little bit better. But that's why when we talk about Parker being a very good, sweet, brave boy, it's usually just in comparison to Kane and Chase, who are still figuring that out.
They're working.
Parker's
on
got a
it.
good
working on
10
it.
years on him.
Yeah, he's way advanced, and he's older, so he's chilled out a little bit. Whereas I think when they were especially a little bit younger, it's everything they're gonna react to because like I've never seen a seagull before. I've never seen this
What is
before. And
Despite being neutered, do you see any changes in Kane and Chase during the summertime?
Yeah, they definitely. I mean, I can't speak to the science of whether there's also hormonal changes happening in them now that they're neutered, but they're 100% reacting to the change in Parker. And so sometimes when Parker stops eating, Kane and Chase are also like, I guess
we're
we're also swimming in circles.
he's our leader, so
Yeah, I guess we do what
the
that
boss.
is. Whereas the seals are just hanging out being like, no, it's fine. We still want our snacks.
seals don't care at all about
No.
what the sea lions are up to.
They really don't. They're good neighbors. But yeah, they definitely do react to the changes in Parker. And I know at least for Chase, he seems like he was neutered a little bit older because you can see like the beginnings of a sagittal crest.
Yeah.
I kind
On
of
his
see that.
head?
He is very distinct looking.
Yeah, he's bigger than Kane is.
He was
he's
neutered
big.
here at the aquarium when
Yeah.
he was about 4.
Oh, wow.
And so he had probably gone through a little bit of puberty before. So yeah, he kind of looks like a little egghead.
Makes so much sense. He looks so different than the other sea lions, and it's funny because the pictures that were taken of Chase before he like officially went on exhibit, I don't feel like that looks like him. He looks so different now, and he looks so different underwater.
Yeah.
Underwater, he has like the biggest eyes. He's very
so
very
cute.
cute.
I think
Like
it's
very
on land, he's a
cartoony
little
cute.
suspicious.
Yeah,
Of what's
he's
going
like-
on.
he's like,
In the tunnel,
going
he's
on?
like, "This is my place. I get this. This is great."
Speaking of in the tunnel, Chase is very interactive. I know during the pandemic and our closures, he was probably the animal that was looking for interaction,
Yeah.
and we were all happy to give it to him.
Yeah, our guests are incredible sources of enrichment for all of our animals, particularly Chase. All of our guests are always doing something new and different and interesting, and all of our animals, especially our mammals, are watching you guys
Yeah.
through that window, and
I
they're
think that's thrilling for people
Yeah.
to realize the animals can see us just as well as we can see them through the window. For any of our guests who might be visiting the aquarium, how would they be able to tell Parker versus Chain?
just from
I like
those
that
two together.
as their band name.
Yeah.
Chain.
Chain or
Parker and the
Case.
Chain.
But how could someone conceivably tell the difference between Parker and Kane and Chase?
So Parker, definitely the easiest one.
You can't tell him apart.
Yeah,
Look-
if there's one that's just like real big and you're
Parker
like,
pretty
that's
easy to
that's
tell apart.
big.
He's
crazy
also like a
large
really
and
kind
has
of
a big
nice
bump on his head.
chocolatey brown color.
He's a good
He's a very
dog.
handsome man. And then Kane and Chase, for the trained eye, are actually look pretty differently from each other. I think it can be a little trickier for people unlike us who don't stare at sea lions all day, every day. But Chase is a little bit bigger. He is a little bit longer, and he has kind of silvery blonde fur, kind of gray compared if you sat him next to Kane.
Who's more warm tone.
Yeah, exactly. It's a cool versus warm tone
an undertone.
situation. Chase is also a little bit more of a blockhead.
Yeah.
Like he's got a big old head.
Literally
on his
and
face.
figuratively.
Yeah.
so.
And then Kane is kind of pointy. He's a little bit of a
He's a
pointy
little
long
snub
boy.
nose also.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the easiest way to tell the difference between Kane and Chase is really some behavioral things, but really one just has a big old face.
So cool. Okay, I want to hear more about their veterinary care here at the aquarium. I know we have things that we do yearly, like an annual exam. You're doing blood draw on a potentially 800-pound animal. You're doing x-rays. You're doing surgeries. You're doing all of these things. Can you talk a little bit about how they volunteer to participate in these things
Yeah.
and what the day-to-day of them is like?
Absolutely, because you've touched on my favorite part of my job. I really enjoy husbandry. I think it's a really clear example of our relationship with these animals. You're asking them to do something that puts them in a somewhat vulnerable position a lot of the time. And you can see as you build a relationship with them, their willingness to be vulnerable changes. And it's always very exciting as you see them start to trust you. But the basic idea of our husbandry behaviors is so that our animals can voluntarily participate in their healthcare. Like we said, Parker, a very large boy. There's not much you can ask an animal that large to do if they don't want to. So the things we mainly focus on are them being willing to go into different areas of our exhibit, where if they were sick, we could ask them to go in there and they could get some individualized care. We work on some diagnostic things, like we work on them doing voluntary x-rays where they'll lay on top of an x-ray plate, and we have this really cool portable x-ray that actually we brought into our exhibit to get x-rays of these animals. We do voluntary eye drops. Parker is on an eye drop every single day. And he is better at them than any person I have ever
Truly.
encountered.
Better than me.
Yeah.
Wait,
I hate doing eye drops.
I have an anecdote about doing eye drops. So at
Good.
one point, I had to give eye drops to another human, and I had always in my career given eye drops to marine mammals. And when you are giving eye drops to marine mammals, you sort of want to go really high with it, just in case they sort of jerk their head or something unexpected happens. You don't want to poke their eye. And so, I'm used to aiming an eye drop from like 2 feet in the air. And so my natural instinct when someone was like, hey, can you help me with eye drops? I'm really bad at like receiving them or like doing them myself. My arm just automatically like 2 feet over their eye, and as they were lying down, and it hit their eye with such velocity, and they described it as being so cold. And I had never thought about the impact of that to you. And the sea lions are used to it, like that's their normal. But humans just kind of like put it in because they're not going to jerk their head while they're doing an eye drop.
Necessarily.
But yeah, so don't
So
give
funny.
other
What about to
people eye drops
yourself?
away.
Do you find yourself like leaning? back
No,
and-
it was the funniest moment. I was like, my natural instinct, like, I'm happy to do eye drops. Open your eye, and my arm's 2 feet above your head.
I think it's just a fun skill we get is like that aim is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Spot
Yeah.
on.
Every once in a while I miss though and just like hits him in the eyebrow and I'm like, I'm sorry, Parker. Let's try that
They're
one
just like,
again.
oopsie. Sorry
Yeah.
about that.
They're already wet. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, they're fine.
We had a video go viral of Parker getting his eye drops, and people are like, "So what? He lives underwater. His eyes are open all the time." And I'm like, "Okay, well, you try giving
Yeah.
an 800-pound animal eye drops.
And his
It
eyes
is
are-
very
It's
impressive.
impressive. He's
And Parker's
impressive.
impressive that he stands still and just
Yeah.
looks up. It's the sweetest.
With the
thing.
sweetest little face you've ever seen in your whole life. And
There's
then
so much,
sometimes
so much trust and
he
so
gets
much.
shy
yeah.
and he gets a little mohawk.
Yeah,
It's the
His
best.
mohawk's really good.
Mm-hmm. Parker is the only one with a mohawk, so if you ever see
if you ever
it,
see
Yeah.
one with him,
That's really the most important way
if you
to
see
tell
one
them
that's
apart.
punk rock, yeah.
it's Parker. So Parker, to my understanding, is trained to do a voluntary blood draw. What does that look like for a sea lion
Yeah.
to volunteer his blood to you?
Yeah.
Here you
So there are multiple strategies that you can get voluntary blood samples from a sea lion. But the way we do it with Parker is we ask him to lay down on our deck, and people will go behind him to his back flippers, and he does this very cute thing where he angles his head slightly to the side. He keeps it nice and down on the deck, but he's like, I want to look at you while you do that. I'm like, you know what? That's understandable.
That's
I
fair.
would also want to look at the person messing with my feet.
Yep.
He lays in that position while we clean around his flipper. Well, the vet staff palpate his flipper to see where that vein is. Sometimes, we put warm water and a warm compress on top of his flipper because sea lions will shunt their blood to their core so that they can stay warm enough, meaning that they don't always have a lot in those
Wow.
flippers when they're cold. And we're able to do a voluntary stick. Honestly, I think the stick is not the hardest part of that behavior. It's that animal feeling comfortable with the extended amount of time that they are laying in
Time
that
and
position while
touch and-
people mess around with their body. I think people usually anticipate the stick being the hard part.
They don't notice.
They
Really.
don't notice. They don't mind. And then we're able to, once the needle's in, just fill up a bunch of blood vials, which is really nice because that not only allows us to do whatever current diagnostics we're looking for, but it allows us to bank blood so we know what's normal for this animal. And we have all these backups for knowing when things change as he gets older.
It's impressive to watch our veterinary team do blood draws on pinnipeds, which have the smallest vessels. Like they are not easy. And I've seen, nurses and people who have taken my blood, and I've certainly seen how difficult it can be with no fur on my
Staying
little.
completely still.
What is this? An
and-
elbow pit? Whatever
Yeah,
that is.
right there.
Yeah, no hair in there. The veins very visible, and it still is difficult. And so watching our veterinarians take it from this like fur covered,
Yeah.
like very
You can
small
maybe feel
vessel.
it, but you can't see it.
And I think I knew that about them. What do you call it? Shunting their
Yeah.
blood. That's so fascinating. So that just adds another. I wish I could do that.
shunt your blood. No, your hands would be so cold.
My
though.
hands are already cold.
I know, you're cold all the time. You can't shunt
Maybe you
more
can
blood.
shunt your blood, and that's the
I already
problem.
shunted the opposite direction.
I've already been shunting my blood the whole time.
Shunting my whole life.
But that behavior and is also related to the reason why we don't sedate Parker or actually any pinnipeds very often. That blood shunting is part of their dive response. And what is a dive response, and how does it impact sort of anesthetizing or sedating a sea lion?
So there's the mammalian dive response. So it's actually something that you and I also have.
you can shunt your blood.
So if you, what happens is when a mammal's face goes into cold water, the body's automatic response is to have your heartbeat slow down and just kind of start to conserve resources, specifically the oxygen within your blood. So for seals and sea lions, well, we technically have the same response. Theirs is a little bit more impressive than ours. In college, I did actually do an experiment where we put heart monitors on and then just literally into a bucket of cold water, put our face and watch the change. And this is a side note, but my lab partner and I did get caught by the by the TA literally Googling what happens when you put your face in a bucket. We were not paying a lot of attention, but I understand it now. Anyway, for seals and sea lions, that heart rate slows down significantly so that they can be as efficient as possible with the oxygen content of their blood. And they are obviously underwater, so they will stop breathing, and they will be able to dive for really impressive amounts of time. Sea lions can dive for up to about 20 minutes, holding their breath that entire time. And so when they are put under anesthesia, that causes their bodies to react in a similar way. So they will often stop breathing on their own, and we are able to breathe for them in that context. But then being able to signal to their body that it is now time to start again can be really tricky, which is particularly why, unless it is critical for an exam, which sometimes it is, we want to do everything voluntarily. We don't want to need to put them in that risk, even though we do have a highly skilled vet team who can mitigate a lot of that risk. We would rather avoid it and do things voluntarily when we can, especially like those x-rays, those ultrasounds,
The blood draw
those
for Parker.
blood draws.
Yeah. It's cool. It's weird to think about your body just being like, yeah, I shouldn't breathe. I'm
Yeah,
probably
not
underwater.
right now.
You're like, no,
Yeah.
you're just out and about, but
I
it's
think
crazy.
That's part of the reason people sometimes forget animals like these are mammals, that they actually can't breathe underwater,
Yeah.
but they're just really good
They're
at
just
holding their
really
breath.
effective at being underwater. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like part of it, they have like higher levels of hemoglobin.
I think so.
Myoglobin? Hemoglobin.
Whatever makes their blood crazy red.
Yeah, it's really bright
it's
red.
real red.
Yeah. And so they're able to carry more oxygen in their blood. One of my favorite things is like part of my job and just part of what I do for fun is scuba diving. And one of the things that human divers have to think about is getting the bends as nitrogen builds up in your system. But one of the really cool things about pinnipeds is they actually don't end up with a lot of air pockets in their body. They're very compressible. So as they dive, there isn't anywhere for that nitrogen to build
They
up
can
in the same way.
Shoot down and shoot up as
Don't their lungs collapse totally so that all of
Yeah.
their oxygen gets dissolved in their blood? It's very weird.
It is very weird.
What they do diving is
But
nuts.
their ribs are very flexible. And
they're just adapting. It's
Yeah,
kind of
so
like
they
we
don't
talked
get the
about
bends.
the very fast flying birds that have to come to a sudden stop. Like they're literally
yeah.
built to do that.
Yeah.
And here's
Yeah.
another animal whose lungs can collapse if
they're
needed.
built
It
to
is-
spend a lot of time underwater.
It's both hemo and myo.
Oh.
Neo.
Because hemo
Should've
is
said
for
that more
blood
confidently.
and myo is for muscles. And so
Okay,
we
okay,
have
okay.
both. And so they have a better capacity to store oxygen in their blood and their muscles. And so they're way better at diving than we ever will be. And they can hold their breath for way longer.
They actually exhale as they dive, as opposed to us when we go underwater. We normally do that big inhale. But obviously, if their lungs are collapsing, that would not
Wow.
be very helpful.
Fascinating. I want to talk about a behavior that they do, which is you'll see them here at the aquarium with one of their flippers sticking straight up out of
Sailing.
the water.
It's called sailing.
It's so sweet. What's that about?
It's one of the ways that they're able to thermoregulate. It's one of the ways that they control their temperature. So their flippers are pretty highly vasculated. They have a lot of like surface level blood vessels, and so when they are a little bit too warm, they can expose that flipper to the air and have like the water evaporate off it. They don't sweat like we do. But it's the same idea of that like liquid evaporating off your skin helps cool you down. And then when they're a little bit too cold, you'll often see them on land and they'll tuck their flippers up under their belly. And it's very cute, and they'll keep them nice and warm against themselves.
They look like a sweet potato when they do that.
do.
The sweetest potato.
They are sweet little potatoes.
We talked a little bit about their behaviors and training already, but I would love to talk kind of how that relates to their enrichment, because I know you guys are training them to do things like jumps in the air, sticking their tongue out, barking.
Those are very important medical behaviors.
I agree. I fully agree. But I know that is enriching to them, and to an animal that is so intelligent and needs a lot of that stimulation. Can you talk a little bit about what that enrichment looks like?
Yeah. So when it comes to the training side of things, one of the biggest things we're looking for, in addition to those husbandry or medical behaviors, is that mental stimulation. An animal out in the wild is using their brain all day, every day, just in order to survive. And at the aquarium, for good reason, we've covered a lot of those basic survival needs for them. We're providing that fish. We have not allowed there to be predators in their environment, but we still want them to use that incredible brain that they have. So we talked about Kane liking to solve puzzles. That's where that comes from, is their ability to solve problems out in the wild. We have them solve those problems under human care by learning new things. It's really fun teaching them new things because they don't speak English. So you're trying to kind of nudge them in the right direction. When they have that light bulb moment of they're like, oh, I got this, they get so into it. It is a very exciting thing for them, and honestly so exciting for us. The cheers you hear from people sometimes when that like approximation towards like a new behavior has been successful is very exciting. So it's one of the ways that we keep their days enriching. But on top of that, we also have literal objects that we can provide that involve them working in different ways for their food. We have feeder balls where they literally, it looks like a lot of dog toys, just large. And it's a big old ball that has holes in it that they have to move around the water, and the fish slowly fall out. And it's very fun watching because every once in a while a sea lion will have it, but they'll miss a fish, and one of the seals is just like waiting to grab the dropped
crocodile.
fish. Yeah.
You have the intelligence, and then you have the intelligence of the animal who's just waiting for them to do the work for it.
It's really great. Or you have one of the seals has gotten the feeder toy, and one of the sea lions who thinks they're all big and strong is like, I'm going to go take it. And our 35-year-old harbor seal Ellie is like, no, you're not. No. This is mine. And then on top of that, we have just different things that we do throughout the day. So we can change up when they get fed. We can do, one of my favorite is called Fish from Heaven, where we go hide somewhere outside their exhibit and we just start throwing fish in the water. And we're probably not as good as we could be, but in theory, they don't know where that's coming from. And it kind of comes out of nowhere.
You're like, whoa, fish.
Yeah, and then they get that kind of opportunistic feed. But a lot of our enrichment program is designed for that mental and physical stimulation in ways that promotes natural behaviors of things they would do out in the wild, which is why so much of it is focused around food. That's a lot of what an animal's life out in the wild is focused around, is just getting enough food.
It's a lot of eating.
It's a lot of eating.
I think when you were talking about training and you're talking about just people getting very excited too, it is funny to see, like, when we are training our animals, we mark good behavior the same way that people training their dogs use a clicker or, you know, like whatever it is. And we use the word good typically to mark good behavior. And we think that we're very scientific and very good trainers, and we're like, good. And it always sounds good. Because the key is consistency in the tone of your bridge or that mark. But we get so excited, and you go from hearing this like very sharp, like consistent good across the exhibit to someone's working on something, and it's like, good, and it's just like the squeakiest, highest pitch, longest word, and it has become reinforcing to the animals over time. But it is funny to see people just totally lose composure because it's so exciting when you're like, I have communicated something to a totally different species that understands what I'm asking, and we got it. We worked together.
That must
and we
be
did
an
it.
amazing feeling.
It's pretty
so
great.
Cool. That's amazing. Okay, with that, I think we'll get into our social media questions.
Social
Thank
media
you, Instagram
questions.
followers. You can follow us at Aquarium Pacific and at Podcific. That's where we post where to submit your questions. So the first question is, where does their name come from? How were they named sea lions? Where do you think that came from?
I actually don't know the for sure history behind this, but my assumption would be is if anyone's ever looked at a southern sea lion, they have this big kind of thick layer of fur mane around their necks that helps protect them. And you look at one of them and you're like, oh, that's a lion that lives in the ocean.
That's a mermaid lion.
Yeah, but in other languages, not necessarily like English, I know in Spanish sometimes it translates to like wolf of the sea. And a lot of people often compare them to dogs. You can kind of see that similar physiology. But I think also that big roar that they have. Some people call it a bark. Sometimes it sounds like a bark. Sometimes they just scream and it sounds like a roar.
We can have Chase's bark versus Chase's roar.
Yeah. And then you can decide if they're wolves or lions.
That's a good idea.
I love that. Do they have a good sense of smell?
They have a pretty impressive sense of smell for an animal that spends a lot of its time underwater.
With its nostrils sealed closed.
Yeah, with the nostrils
Something that I
literally
forget
closed.
about. Yeah. It's really cool to see them underwater. You see them just totally shut to keep water out. And
Little
then the
fold
second
them
they
like
get
nostrils.
off,
Their noses look like little hearts. If you ever get a print of a sea lion nose, it's literally shaped like a little heart. It's very cute. I know every time we talk about them, it's just more that makes them really good at being in the ocean, which is like, I guess, their main deal.
I guess that's a point. They're called sea lions, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, they do have a pretty good sense of smell. The first thing that comes to mind for me for why that's important is it's one of the ways that moms recognize their pups. So when their pup has gotten a little bit older and the mom's going to forage and start to eat again, they want to find the correct pup again. And one of the ways they can do that is how that pup smells.
that's my stinky boy.
There's my stinky little guy.
I know that stinky guy.
I do find it
anyway.
impressive that they can tell the difference because they're all real.
They're all
stinky.
stinky. I think some of it's how they sound too, right? They call to their
Yeah,
pups.
they definitely yell back
It's
and
such a
forth to their
cute little
moms.
the babies are so sad sounding.
Who is the loudest sea lion?
Kane.
It's
Kane.
Kane's pretty loud. Kane's pretty loud.
If we should get a decibel meter and just
should
stand
get a
right in front of
decibel
Yeah.
meter.
So I was like, Parker's is so deep.
Yeah, it
you
feels
know?
contained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like it's definitely a really impressive sound. Like I think if I heard that one out of nowhere, that might be the most like intimidating to me.
Who's the most
And then-
intimidating is a different question.
Yeah.
Versus the loudest.
But I think Kane's is probably the most painful to hear really close to your ear. But I think Harpo was the loudest.
Harpo was pretty darn loud.
Yeah, because he also liked to lean in for it.
I think he got a kick out of like getting people
Yeah.
to jump a little bit. He's like, "Whoa, I'm gonna be super
really
loud
loud.
right now."
I think that question does come from our very first viral TikTok, which was who is the loudest sea lion at the aquarium, and Harpo completely took the cake. It was really funny because I was working with Jeff and Harpo on that last scene in the TikTok, and Jeff cued Harpo to interrupt me, which I think adds to the hilariousness of the video, and it's just so good. It's just he just is screaming in my face, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm so lucky.
Blessed. Hashtag blessed.
Truly. And that's pinned to our TikTok profile. I'll link every sea lion video we make.
I'll just link
It's
everything in the link in bio.
They're not my favorite or anything. It's not
I'm gonna tell
obvious.
Goji.
You can tell her anything. She won't listen.
Goji's like, I don't care.
She cannot hear.
I have 9 brains, and
have
I
9
care
brains.
about very different things that you care about.
How have people studied their physiological adaptations, like their breath hold and their depth of dive?
I think some of it is done at the Long Marine Lab and similar research places. And animals can actually be trained to participate in these types of things, which is crazy. I don't know specifically if they've just recorded the longest dive they've ever seen or they trained a sea lion to dive very deep, but they certainly can participate in sort of metabolic and oxygen consumption studies and get an understanding of what their bodies are capable of. And so there are some amazing research labs that train marine mammals to participate so we understand how their bodies work, and that information can then inform decisions on like what's healthy in the ocean and what should we be doing, how loud can sounds be without bothering, things like that that are important. But I'm sure some of it is also observational data too. Like if you're like 1,000 feet down at the bottom of the ocean, you see a sea lion, you're like, hey, that's a sea lion.
We have a very interesting question here. Who is the cutest and why is it Chase? From Megan Smiley, this podcast.
That might
very own.
be a little bit biased.
A little bit.
He is pretty cute. I do think it's the blockhead part of him.
He looks like a giant egg.
He does. He's just a big ol' egg.
Which is cute.
It's really
If
cute.
you're
Eggs are
Megan.
cute.
I think it depends on literally which one of them is currently directly in front of me. And I'm like, that's probably the cutest
the
sea lion
cutest
I've ever
one.
seen.
I mean, Parker right up close with his big
His
old bug
big
eyes.
big brown eyes.
And he
It's
has
really
a
good.
really cute little face. Like, and he
does.
sticks out his tongue, and he gets a mohawk. And then you see Kane, and you're like, well, he's tiny, and he's
He's
smart,
pretty
and
cute.
Got that
he's
little
fast.
And also,
Yeah.
he has a nice tactile behavior where you can reach out and he leans his neck into your hand. And that's
it's like just
very
scratch
sweet
it.
and reinforcing for me personally.
Then you have Chase.
And then you have Chase, and you're like, that's pretty cute. too.
Fascinating.
And he sings at you.
Yeah.
And
And he really
beat that.
commits to every guess
he
he
works
makes.
so hard.
They're all so charming in their own ways.
They really are.
so sweet.
So to answer your question, Megan, it's not necessarily
them.
Chase.
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah, that's true. Chase is such a fan favorite, though. He is so.
He really is.
He's like the jock of the
He is
family.
the jock. He's the quarterback.
He is athletic for sure.
Yeah.
And I do think he's smart. He's just smart in a way that he understands and I maybe don't.
Yeah.
Wait, okay, so if Chase is the jock,
Kane is like
Parker-
This is my favorite game.
okay.
please take it away.
I think Kane is more like he's not like a nerd,
And he's like popular, but
but
smart,
he's definitely
you
in
know?
like
He's the art-
advanced placement classes.
Yeah.
But he's a little. He could be a little competitive with everyone about
Yeah.
it too. He's like, "What did you get on your test?"
Yeah. That's exactly
that
what it
kid.
is.
And Parker,
He's
ASB
just
president.
sweetest. He's so
he is
sweet.
such a good boy.
He
I
is
feel
class
like he's
president.
everyone's older brother. You know,
Yeah.
like he's like the one that you watch. Like you're just like, oh, you're gonna be real successful
Yeah.
in life.
Oh,
He's prom king.
He's
Yeah.
prom
He's
king.
all of
And
the
he's just
above.
nice to everyone, which is funny to say because he is our most dominant male.
But
And
he is sweet. He's
he
a
is
sweet
sweet.
boy.
That's so funny.
He is sensitive though.
Sweet and sensitive.
Yeah, that's
It's a
him.
good combo. Amazing. Outside of their pods or families in the oceans, do they have friend groups?
So once like a sea lion has weaned from its mom and starts to be on its own, they tend to hang out in like juvenile groups as they get a little bit bigger. Usually juvenile males and the females are a little bit more separate. And then as they get bigger and bigger, then they kind of end up with their own harem of females during breeding season. And the females will all kind of hang out together with whoever their big male is out on the beach. But the nice thing about sea lions is, while they might not stick to the same social groupings all the time, they are very social, which is why you always get those really cool videos of them all sleeping together out on a dock, and there's just like 40 sea lions all smushed together.
They're phygmotactic.
Yeah.
They want to touch each other. They gravitate towards physical contact, which is
So
interesting.
Cute
Yeah.
to see them all snuggled up on the beach. Do they have any favorite petting spots, or are they ticklish?
I have never experienced one being ticklish in the way that I think we would think about them being ticklish, but I've also, to be honest, never tried to tickle them. Normally, I'm keeping my distance a little bit more than that. But like I think mentioned earlier, Kane definitely leans into when we scratch along his neck, and whether that is because we always feed him a lot of fish for that, or because it also feels nice when we do it. They don't speak English, so we can't ask
Became
specifically.
his favorite because of all the
Yeah,
fish.
exactly. So sea lions are tactile animals with each other. They're
Tactical
tactical.
animals. I love that.
Are tactile animals, but we don't spend a lot of our time just petting them.
No.
Usually we got other stuff we got to work on.
I think that the inverse can be said. They definitely have least favorite petting spots.
Very true.
They don't really like being touched on their face. They don't really like being touched on their belly. And I think they are essentially still wild animals in their core. And so anything that feels vulnerable to them, they are extremely wary of. And if you're touching a spot where they're like, hey, that's all of my organs, or that's my whole face, they're going to be a little bit weirder about it. So they definitely have more preferred and less preferred, but I don't know that it's necessarily, I want to be pet here.
Yeah.
It's more, when I get pet here, I get fed a lot of
fine.
food.
It's pretty good.
Are they susceptible to diseases like rabies or things that our land mammals are susceptible to?
They certainly can be. They are mammals, and I know with the avian influenza, they have detected that in some pinnipeds. Things like rabies, as far as I know, there has not been a case in the U.S. of a pinniped contracting rabies, or at least not one that we have caught.
I would be so scared of that.
That would be very scary.
That's-
Kind of going back to the Jamoke acid, like
Yeah.
any animal that large, when they're not
not-
fully in control,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's a little frightening.
Wow.
But I think there has been one case ever. I don't know that it was a sea lion, though.
Some sort of pinniped.
Yeah, is my memory of a conversation I had a really long time ago.
Are they vaccinated against any?
They do get
Common
vaccinations.
diseases.
I think they.
We do West Nile
Yeah.
vaccines annually at the aquarium, for sure.
They are, they're out in the open. If you've ever been to our habitat, it's outside. So mosquitoes can bite them. They get itchy little mosquito bites, just like we do. And unfortunately, mosquitoes are vectors for disease. And so we do want to protect them against whatever might be introduced.
But they are plenty of them are trained to do voluntary IM or intramuscular,
which is cool.
Injections.
I don't think
Makes our
they
life
really
easy.
notice.
They
Just
don't.
like,
No.
my flipper's being touched.
Yep. And now it's over.
And that's done. The last question we got was drop the Parker lore, which I feel like this whole episode has
The
been. But do you
lore.
have any additional Parker lore to share?
My favorite story I've ever heard about Parker came from one of our volunteers who has actually been volunteering at the aquarium since before it opened. We have some incredible volunteers who have been with us the whole time. And so they knew Parker when he came to the aquarium at like 1 or 2 years old. They knew baby Parker. And apparently young/baby Parker was a little bit less of a steady good boy than he is right now.
A little naughty.
And I've just heard stories about them like trying to train new things like a flipper stand where he stands up on his front flippers and it's very impressive. And them like asking it, I'm trying to remember if I'm telling this right. It involved him being asked a behavior on one of our rocks that we have on exhibit and just like being so excited about it. He just like flung himself off the rock, which is so hard to imagine for our like steady,
biggest
sweet
guy.
boy
Yeah.
that he has matured
that he
into.
had energy to fling
It was
himself.
just a little crazy. Yeah.
It's funny.
Oh, that's
He
adorable.
is just the absolute best animal that we have. Like, hands down, Kane is amazing. Chase is amazing. But Parker is all around a good boy. And that is so rare to find in, like,
Harpo was too.
Harpo was an all around good boy, too. Harpo was an all around loud boy, also.
Yeah.
What else is Parker lore? I feel like there's so many things.
How old was he when he arrived at the aquarium?
He's
Do
a
you know
year
the-
old.
A year, just
Yeah.
a little
Pretty
baby.
young.
Yeah.
He was tiny. And if you see pictures of baby Parker, he looks like Parker, but you're like, whoa.
Like the shrunk.
Facial features are the same, but then just add like a huge lump on his head,
Uh-huh.
and that's him.
He still had that little mohawk too.
Yeah,
I think
he
they
had a
shared.
little baby mohawk.
Yeah. For
He
anyone
was the
that
cutest.
isn't going to be able to see Parker up close, his little mohawk is actually like coarser fur, and it feels different than the rest of it, which makes it very fun to play with.
built in.
And when he's dry, just like 3 or 4 hairs stand up right at the front
we
of
have
his
some
sagittal
good
crest.
pictures of when he's been woken up after he's decided it's time to go to bed, and he has literal bed head.
And he's like, oh, you guys.
it's the cutest.
I want to think of one more story that might be Parker lore. What else has he done in his lifetime?
Parker is a really sweet boy, but when people are in his environment, he has his path that he chooses to travel. And so it is really funny when we dive in there with him because Parker is not watching out for you.
Yeah, he's swimming with his
are
eyes
watching
closed.
out for
Yeah.
Parker. He knows his house. He knows his environment. And so you do kind of spend the whole time just kind of looking around, making sure you're not in his path, because he's absolutely skimmed the top of my head as I've
You're like,
been
"Whoa."
diving before.
Oh, I know. Parker has the same routine every day because he is a boy that colors inside the lines. That's how I
Yes.
often hear him described as he loves to follow the rules and things that he knows exist. And so Parker, for example, wakes up every morning, spends about 10 to 20 minutes on the ledge scratching his neck, kind of behind the concrete pillar where you can't see him if you were a guest. And then he comes up on our steps and he rubs his face and sneezes all
Yeah,
over the
his sneeze
stairs
rock.
for like 10 minutes. And then we have to clean all his sneezes off of his sneeze rock. And then he goes to do his sessions. And then around 4 p.m., he goes to bed. And that's like every
He's
day.
an old man,
Day
and
of
he's
life.
figured out what works for him.
But we used to do our sessions at slightly different times than we do now. And, you know, just the way programmatically we've changed things, Parker was so used to his routine that it took him months to adapt. To like, we'd be like, we've been feeding you at 9:15 every time, every day for like a year now. And he's like, it's 9:45. They're probably coming back for my actual breakfast. And you're like, dude,
Daylight savings is rough.
he has no
Parker.
concept of it. He's like,
think
that's not
You guys
right.
are late.
My favorite is we've been pretty variable recently of where we enter our habitat because we are very reinforcing to them. We bring all the fish, we bring,
They
fun,
see you
interesting
coming.
moments.
Yeah.
They see us coming. So we've been entering from the other side of our exhibit a lot. And they all have what we call stations where they begin their sessions. That's how they know who they're working with. And Parker will just swim past his trainer because he's like, you entered from the wrong direction. I don't
not
think
here."
we're doing this yet. And then he'll watch, like, Kane and Chase will catch on a little bit quicker. And they're like, all right, we're starting. And Parker's like, oh, my, you've been there the whole time.
He's like, how'd you get in here? I didn't even see you guys come in.
Which is why we do that. We want him
Yeah.
to have those moments where things are a little shaken up for him. But
He's-
he adjusts slower than
He
the other
does.
boys, for sure.
Ooh, the last one, and this is the one I was trying to think of, is that Parker hates herring. He doesn't hate herring, but it is his least favorite food type, and he has learned to
his
tolerate it.
veggies.
Yeah, it's broccoli, it's Brussels sprouts, it's whatever. But especially if you cut herring in pieces, for whatever reason, it makes it infinitely grosser to him.
Or if it's in pieces and icy.
Yeah. Oh
Absolutely
no,
not.
it's over. But there was a time where we were working with sort of like rut-ish Parker, like pre-rut Parker, and we were tossing him food. And he was on deck, and he was doing a reasonable session, and someone had cut his herring in his bucket, and, us feeding him what he has, we tossed him a piece of cut herring, and he turns his face to the side and lets it hit him in the cheek instead of catching it like he does with every other fish. It falls to the ground, and it's not in a position and we haven't picked it up immediately. And whatever he was doing, he moved his flipper and he stepped on it. And he, like, so horrified, picked up his flipper, like, kind of like shaking and was staring at it. And he just, like, made a face. Like, I've never seen a sea lion make a face, but it was, like, obvious disgust. And you could see, it's an 800-pound animal that had stepped on a little piece of fish that had smeared all along his flipper. And he just turned with his flipper up and hopped to the water so that it wouldn't touch the ground again, and never came back for the rest of the session. He was like, that was so gross.
Similarly,
Disgusting,
we
you
tried
guys.
out what we have called fish gel, which is just kind of an emergency supplement that we could have if
we
for whatever
needed to.
reason we could not get access to fish. We want to make sure that we can take care of our animals. And so we tried the fish gel, and I was the one working Parker on the morning we tried the fish gel, and we all knew
It wasn't
Parker
gonna
was
go.
not
for it.
going to go for this. But he didn't notice the first couple I fed to him. And I was like, wow, like,
He
this is
likes it.
so good. Like, this is awesome. So I, like, fed it. And I, like, fed him some fish, fed another one, fed him some fish, went for the third one. And he figured out what was going on.
Something's fishy here.
Yeah, he spit it out, shook his head, and he not only didn't come back for that session, he didn't come back for the next 2 sessions.
He's like, this day is ruined.
Yeah. Similarly, it was close to rut, so
Yeah.
he wasn't all that
more
motivated by
sensitive.
food anyway. Whereas Chase was in the corner just chowing down, eating all the stuff that Parker dropped. He was
I
like,
love
fish
this.
gel is great.
You should
Yeah.
always
Do this
blend
more
up fish
often.
into a goo for me.
I think Kane and Harpo did eat it, but not enthusiastically.
Harpo used to, we were trying trout with him, and Harpo used to swallow the trout down and then wait till you weren't looking, or you like looked away, or he would walk away from you and he would like just spit it up in a corner, kind of the way that dogs who like take a treat from you that they
don't
don't
want
really
this right
want,
now.
they just put it in a corner and they come back. And so he would always pretend like he was eating it, but he would just disappear underwater, and then he would come back and you would see a trout fly nearby, and you're like, hey bud, I know what you just
It's very
did.
weird
Yeah,
when
I
an animal
ate
that doesn't have a gag reflex. So they'll just store fish in their throat sometimes, and you're
And
like,
then, whoop.
that's gross.
Yeah. That's our best lore.
This is
Yeah.
great Parker lore. This is great sea lion lore in general. Great Aaron lore. Great
Come talk
everything
to
lore.
us.
Yeah.
Come to the Arpinipit exhibit. We will
please
talk
do.
about our animals for far
For
too
probably
long.
a little
Yeah.
bit longer than you anticipated, but
You might not want it.
I'll have a great time.
But we do, and we're happy to talk about it. That's amazing. Well, thank you, Aaron, so much for
Yeah,
being on the
thank you for
podcast
having
today.
me.
That
You're
was a
welcome.
blast. You? No.
You're always on the
this is-
podcast.
Thank you, Aaron Bell. This was wonderful.